Do you like this kind of music?
This is what he said.
Do you enjoy and marvel at what others are doing, of pretending to be healing others and saying all these things about God and the Holy Spirit, or give us money and you will be saved? You see, most people think that they have not drunk the wine of the woman that he talks in Revelation. But it could be that you have been fooled and your eyes have been shut and you have drunk the wine. You have been drunken by the wine of that harlot. Let's explain. You see, in the book of Revelation, it talks about two different women. And we're going to try to discuss and the difference of those two women. Here we're going to focus on Revelation 17 and Revelation 18, which it talks about Babylon, the harlot, that woman. Who is she? What is Babylon? What does it mean? Well, we know the other woman is mentioned in Revelation chapter 12, okay, about being dressed very differently from the woman in Revelation 17 and Revelation 18. But what is Babylon? What is this harlot? What is that wine that everybody has drunken and she has fooled everybody? Apparently, we're going to see first that it's not just everyone that she has fooled, because there are many people already that have followed her with no problem. She doesn't need to fool them. They're already, we can say, lost, though Christ has not come. So we cannot say that they have been lost. But the way that they're walking right now, they will be currently lost. So, what is Babylon? Are we following the same iniquities as her? Because it tells us very clear, come out of her, my people. So let's look first at Babylon. Okay, Babylon, we know that is very well mentioned in the book of Daniel. And always when we study the book of Revelation, we need to study the book of Daniel. And we find that in Daniel chapter 4. Excuse me. Daniel chapter 4, in verse 30. It gives us some characteristics of Babylon. Okay? And we know that it was a powerful nation. We know that it was a religious center. They were very much into idolatry. And we can see that, and we can look at that in other further study. We will be talking a lot about Babylon. It also mentions the ancestor worship they had. And we'll actually be talking about that very briefly here. And it also has sun worship. No, S-O-N, S-U-N. So they had those very distinct characteristics: idolatry, ancestor worship, and sun worship. Now, looking at those characteristics, we can already see that the book of Revelation is pointing us to Babylon. Now, is this a little Babylon? I mean, will Babylon be reconstructed again here in earth? We definitely know no. Babylon has tried to be reconstructed, but the Lord said that Babylon will be no more. Meaning that when it had its destruction, it was not going to come back, just like Sodom and Gomorrah. They have tried to rebuild it. They have tried to, we know that Hitler tried to rebuild Babylon, and he was not successful in doing it because it was a promise from God. Okay? But looking at those three characteristics, now the very first time we find the word Babylon, or ancestor, or meaning where it came from, the word Babylon, we find it in the book of Genesis. From the very beginning, we find in Genesis 11:9, when it talks about Babel. Okay, Babel comes eventually from the word to Babylon. Now, what occurred there in Genesis chapter 11, verse 9? We know that all these people, okay, the flood had occurred, and everybody wanted to build a tower as big that if there was a flood that will occur, they will not die from it. Now, it's a shame, and if we look at the meaning of all these things, God had made it a promise already. God had made a promise that He will not destroy the earth once again by a flood. but they still not follow the promise of God. They did not trust that God will once again not destroy the earth by a flood. So they build this tower, okay? And we know the meaning of Babel. Now, something occurred when they were building the tower. All the languages, God says that it put all these different languages into a people. And it created confusion. Confusion so much that they cannot build that tower. So we know and start to get an understanding of the word Babel or Babylon as confusion. Now, why will the book of Revelation here, talking about the woman in Revelation 17 and 18, that harlot that it talks about is using the word Babylon? Because he's starting to give us a hint that what this woman, the very purpose of this woman is to create confusion. Confusion on what? On the very first thing that we started seeing in the book of Daniel as the meaning of Babylon, the three different characteristics of Babylon: idolatry, ancestor worship, or we can call it also immortality of the soul, okay, and sun worship. Sun worship as S-U-N. Now, what is all of this talking about? We know that the meaning from God, and talking as a symbolic and not a literal Babylon, we know in the book of Isaiah, chapter 13, verse 9, it mentions that Babylon will be destroyed and it will be no more. In Jeremiah chapter 51, in verse 7, it talks about Babylon, how it's going to be in ruins. Okay? So we know that the Bible is pointing already to a symbolic, because it was going to be ruined. The Bible never mentions that Babylon will be reconstructed again. Again, will be destroyed, never again to come back. Now, it's interesting that in the book of Daniel, in chapter 5, it continues to talk about Babylon. And we know that Babylon, something very important was occurring. And it gives us to the kingdom of Belshazzar. And why the kingdom was actually destroyed is because he used, as it mentions in Daniel chapter 5, in verses 1 and 2, he used the holy items, okay, the holy items of the temple. He used them for false gods. Okay? That is completely a form of idolatry. And you're thinking, well, okay, and how does that apply now? Well, idolatry can be, now it's being portrayed by many different churches, or, and I say churches in parentheses, okay, many different pastors, many different ways, and people are being fooled to believe that that is God's way. Some people believe that by you giving the money to a pastor, you're going to be saved. Or no, the Lord is going to bless you because you're giving more money. No, that is false teaching. That is a way of idolatry. Okay? That is following the same way that papal Rome, we know that was doing. And the Catholic Church, when it was rising, that was the main purpose. You had to give money in order to be saved. So that was not something new. Okay? It has been coming up, and that's a form of idolatry. We only save by the blood of Christ, not by giving money. The Lord blesses you, and if you're honest to God, yes. Will the Lord bless you? Yes. But do you have to give money in order for that to happen? No. That is a form of idolatry. Okay? We are faithful. And when we give something, we do it out of our own heart. From the love of Christ. Not because some pastor is telling me, oh yeah, give 50, give 20, give 100, give 1,000. Or some people, the Lord has impressed me to tell you that somebody here is going to give $1,000. That is false teaching. That is idolatry. How about all this music that is happening? Oh no, I feel the power of God. Lift my hands. Yes, that is an emotion. An emotion. That is a form of idolatry. People jumping. Oh yeah, praise God. That is a form of idolatry. God never told us to worship that way. That was the same way that they used to worship their gods. Dancing, screaming, yelling, all these things. And we find just the same very example with Elijah. What did Elijah do? He did a simple prayer in order for God to answer his prayer. And the other over 400 prophets that were over there, he says that they were dancing, screaming, yelling, cutting themselves, doing all these things, asking their gods, oh God, bring their fire down to our altar. Did it happen? Absolutely not. Because God does not work that way. That is a form of idolatry. Now, let's keep going. We know in the book of Isaiah, chapter 13, it says that Babylon will raise no more. Babylon will raise no more. So we know once again that the Babylon that is talking here in chapter 17 and 18 of Revelation is talking about a symbolic Babylon. Very important to recognize that. Okay? But why does it mention Babylon here as that woman? Because the characteristics that he had in the past will once again be applied here in the end of time, as it's talking here in the book of Revelation. Now, why is using as a woman? Revelation. Why is using as a woman? And this is a very important concept, because we know again that there are two women that are mentioned in the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 17 and Revelation chapter 12. The woman in Revelation chapter 12 is very different than the woman in Revelation chapter 17. It has very different characteristics. It's dressed in white. It's not dressed in scarlet. It's not dressed in red, meaning sin. Okay? It has 12 crowns upon his head. Okay? It's standing upon the moon. It has different characteristics than the woman here. And it's not full of pearls. It doesn't have a cup of wine and holding in her hand. It doesn't have all these other characteristics. So we know they're very different, these two churches. And I say churches because women are described as a church. It's a symbolism that it uses. Where do we find that? If we look in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 6, verse 2. We also look in 2 Corinthians, verse 11. Verse 2, it uses the symbolism as a woman. Okay? It uses the church as a symbolism of a woman. Meaning that woman in the Bible, we find it that is used as a church. It represents a church, a complete system. Okay? So, why is it important to understand? Because here the woman is sitting upon the beast. And we know the beast, and we're going to look at different studies on that to explain this a little bit further. But beast in the Bible, as we look in the book of Daniel especially, it mentions about kingdoms, kings, all these nations that could actually search. And we know that the beast after beast after beast in the book of Daniel is mentioned as kingdoms. It has that representation. And we find here the woman that is sitting on that beast, meaning that a church, and if it's continue to talk about nations and kingdoms, eventually it's talking about some type of a political power. Meaning that this woman, this church, and the political power will once again unite to do something, as it says here in Revelation chapter 17. That is to persecute, and has the blood of the saints with her and the martyrs of Jesus. They unite for a purpose. That is to destroy God's people. Let's look at some of the characteristics that woman has. Revelation chapter 17. We know in Revelation chapter 17, verse 3, it mentions that is sitting, right? Is sitting on the beast. Revelation 17, verse 4, it tells us the color that she's wearing. The colors of purple, red. Revelation 17, 6, it says that it persecutes God's people. In Revelation 17, verse 9, it says that it's located in a city of 7 mountains. Now, we know that based on different studies, if we look at all the different meanings, it talks about a very specific church. And I say church again because it's using woman as a representation of a church. It's using it as a symbolism here. So we have to understand that now. It's saying that this is the mother of harlots. Meaning that it has daughters. If she's the mother, it has daughters. Meaning then that whatever this system is doing, there is a lot of other churches that are following the same thing, doing the same thing, the same false teachings, the same confusion that is trying to do. The same confusion, because it is Babylon, the mother of harlots. And that same confusion eventually either has or has been adopted already by his daughters, by these other churches. Is it true? Let's look a little bit further. Revelation chapter 18, verse 3. It says, "For all the nations have drunken of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury." Again, looking here, that the simplest teachings have already been adopted by all these nations, all these kingdoms, all these people that have drunk or that have drinking the wine of this woman. So what was the belief of Babylon? What was the belief of Babylon in regards of immortality? Well, we know in Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 14, it talks about how they used to worship Tammuz. And Tammuz, we know that it was their god for their food, their vegetables. And it died each year. And each year they will actually give a praise, okay, or a worship to this Tammuz. Why? That is called immortality of the soul. Meaning that whatever has died is still not dead. Somehow the soul is still living somewhere. Now that is a complete false teaching. We know that Ecclesiastes 9:5, Psalm 115:17, 1 Corinthians 15 verses 51 and 52. It tells us that once we are dead, the dead know nothing. We rest in the grave. There's no immortality of the soul. It's not like we go to heaven. We don't go, or we go to hell. We are resting in the ground until God comes back. And we'll be touching that in another study. The second coming of Christ. But it tells us that the dead know nothing. There is no immortality of the soul. And that's a big belief of so many people. And in here is using the same idolatry, the same ancestor worship, the same immortality of the soul. How it has been infiltrated into the churches, supposedly Christian churches, where so many believe that once you die, you're not really dead. Your soul is up in heaven or in hell. That is a disbelief, and what the devil has made it to think of people that no, oh no, your soul is in heaven. Oh no, yeah, my grandmother died, or my wife, or whoever, but I know they're in heaven. I know they're having it. No. If there was a person that could have gone to heaven immediately after it passed away, it would have been Christ himself. Christ, imagine Christ still, when he resurrected, he said, "Don't touch me." He told Mary, "Don't touch me because I still have not ascended to my Father." And if it's so that the only person that have never sinned, when he died, he still had not gone up to heaven, how does it make you believe that somebody that is here on earth, that sinner, has already died and go up to heaven? That is a misconception, and that is a disbelief. That is exactly the confusion that Babylon has brought for so many people. And from there, we think of all this other stuff. Oh no, I had an appearance of my grandfather or somebody up in different ages that had already died, and they have appeared to me. No, that is the very work of Satan. Satan has confused you. That is confusion from the woman, from harlot. That is part of the confusion that we we seen here in that it talks in the book of Daniel of how Babylon used their same belief, the same characteristics, is using it once again to try to confuse you. And so many people have been confused, so many Christians have been fooled by that same very concept. Let's wake up, people. Wake up. Study the Word of God. What else? What else do we find here with this Babylon? We know Ezekiel 8:16, a very strong characteristics that the people of Babylon used to do. It was the sun, S-U-N, worship. They believe in the sun god. Now, there's only one day that God sanctified. Only one day. And we find it in the Ten Commandments. And he says, remember the Sabbath day. Is the only day that he hath made holy and sanctified. And here Babylon used to make the sun worship. And we know from the sun worship, just as it was changed, because nowhere in the Bible, we know that there was no change of the worship from Sabbath to Sunday. Sunday, it is known as it was for Constantine himself, of why he also worshiped on the sun god as a Sunday which he created, changing the Sabbath day to Sunday. For what? To worship on the Sunday, worship the sun god. There is no other instance in the Bible. Even before that time, that's why the papal Rome and so many others killed so many people that used to worship on the Sabbath day. But how the papal Rome and how we have all followed, how the Christians have been confused and has still following the same doctrine that the papal Rome started. If you look at history, and we will have a complete study on that, we know that the only time that the people supposedly, which is outrageous that they call it their Sabbath day, because we know Sabbath is Saturday. Okay? The only time that it was changed, it was by papal Rome. Constantine, all these people had actually made a decree to change it. And if you did not follow, eventually you were killed. And we know that it's a prophecy that the same book of Daniel actually talks about, of how they were changed the times and the laws. But here we find Babylon, how it worships the same characteristics of the same confusion that has brought. Is applying it now to the end of time. And how many churches have been following that same doctrine? Immortality of the soul, some worship. Now, how about idolatry? And this is such a big subject, because we've seen of how we try to use two different things: the things from the world and the things of Christ. Do you really believe that all these singers of the world, they're praising God for it? Most of them are all satanic worshipers. They have sold their soul to the devil, to Satan. And they all recognize it and say it themselves. And you still listen to them? You're using idolatry. You're trying to follow Christ, still following the devil, even without conscience. That's why the woman has you drunken. You cannot even see the truth. You cannot even see what's in front of you. You're trying to worship a person, but listening to somebody else. That is idolatry. And you're trying to use God's things and trying to apply it, and how we're bringing things of the world and trying to apply it here to our churches. That is idolatry. How we're using the same symbols, the same things. Listen, these people already, many people, even Christians, how they follow idolatry. Wake up, people. Wake up. It's time to get out of Babylon. Get out of Babylon. Look for the truth. Jeremiah 51, verse 6. It gives us the same message that we find here in the book of Revelation. I want to read it to you. Jeremiah 51, verse 6. Flee from the midst of Babylon, and everyone save his life. Do not be cut off in her iniquity, for this is the time of the Lord's vengeance. He shall recompense her. That was the message even back then. Telling God's people, get out of Babylon. Get out of Babylon. What is the message now? Revelation chapter 18, verses 4 and 5. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins and lest you receive of her plagues. For her sins have reached to heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. What is iniquity? It's refusing to do the right thing even though you know it's wrong. And we see that a lot. What should God's people do in the end of time? 1 Timothy verses 3, verses 15. But if I'm delayed, I write so that you may know that you ought to conduct yourself in the house of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and ground of truth. The pillar and ground of the truth. What does God people do? They look for the truth. The pillar is God. Our only resource is God. Look for the truth. Revelation chapter 14, verse 12. It gives us the characteristics of the end time people. And there are two main characteristics that it mentions there. Revelation chapter 12, verse 14. Revelation 14, verse 12. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are those that keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus. It's important to note that it's saying not faith in Jesus. It's the faith of Jesus. Because even Satan has faith in Jesus. Does he believe that he's going to lose? Yeah, he knows. Does he believe that God is the only creator? Of course he does. But having the faith of Jesus is something completely different. It's having Christ living inside of you. And if Christ is living inside of you, you know that you will worship in the right day. You know that there's no immortality of the soul. Christ has to be in you. Christ lives in us. It's the only way that we can be immortal. The only way that we can have life is Christ in us, by his own presence. Idolatry. If Christ is in you, do you listen to the same thing of Lady Gaga, Beyonce, all these other artists that all they do is worship Satan? Even the same Christian songs that they sing, they still worship Satan. All this bunch of people that are pretending to worship Christ. But as we know, here in Revelation chapter 17 and 18, again, it's talking about those churches, how they have been fooled by the idolatry. and you still follow them, follow only Christ. Look for his things. Spend time with him. Search the scriptures. Find the truth. Come out of her, Babylon. Come out of her, my people. Time is running short. I truly believe Christ is coming soon. And I hope that you can come out of her. May God bless you.